And the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Hello and welcome to the only independent news and opinion program where we chronicle two distinct possibilities, either the demise and possible extinction of the Homo sapien or the greatest leap forward in human history. One thing is certain, though, there is no status quo. This is the Daily Australian Radio Show, episode number 65 for Friday, April 4th, 2025. My name, Jason Olbourne, and right now, the boss of the whole venture, her name, Nicola Charles. How about that for a promotion? Happy Friday.
Happy Friday, Jason. I think Fauci and Gates tried to extinct me yesterday. I had the weirdest thing that I haven't had for many a year pop up and try and get me. And luckily it was a 24-hour thing because, I've not had the old juicy juice. The carrot, whatever code you want to use for it, but it was not human. I don't know why, but I know when something's like natural and it's not, because I'm reasonably natural in my life with food and health and stuff. And I've still got one eye half closed. I definitely look like a zombie. And yesterday, I think I sneezed at work about 3,000 times. And after about the 700th time, my coworker said, "That's it. We're not saying bless you anymore." Like, it was just ridiculous. Luckily, I sit miles away from everyone else. My sneezes are very loud. And it was weird. And I do this thing where I smoke these 2 organic cigarettes a day. Didn't want them, forced myself to have them. And today I feel, tickety-boo, my eyes still half closed. But this thing tried to get me. And a lot of people are saying that they're getting this weird stuff, these weird illnesses coming along. And of course, if they have had the carrot, they're ill for a lot longer. So it was a bit weird. It was a horrible feeling like there's something out there. Which is true. There is something out there. They have been playing with their chemistry sets. Remember when we were kids and we read those books about mad scientists and they were the ones that were going to destroy the world? Well, turns out they did, or they tried to. But in the afternoon, Jason, I was royally cheered up because on the big business TV next to me, I saw the hand of God along with the rest of Australia. I saw the hand of God shove the liar Anthony Albanese off his stage.
It was pretty funny. At that point, Albo became Joe Biden politically. It's incredible, isn't it, what changes an election campaign? Because that certainly has. Because now, if you're looking at a PM that literally fell down and puts his hands up like it was, it was pathetic to watch. It really was.
Well, his bodyguard, it's like he's found Bigfoot. His bodyguard is the hairiest human being I've ever seen. These massive hairy arms went down to pick him up. And then later on, of course, look, for me, Anthony Albanese is always going to be the Prime Minister of nowhere who wore an orange turban. Now, the orange beanie looks good on me on my podcast. It doesn't suit Albo. Like, it's just not the same. But then later on, I think Dutton's speechwriter won the election for him. And, I'm not super rapt about that. Because I do think they're the uni party, because he came out and did this speech, which someone sent to me on Instagram. So I only got to watch the first half of it because I'm not on Instagram and they're a bit funky like that. They won't let you watch stuff because it's Zuckerberg. And in his speech, paraphrasing, he basically said that he wants us to have Australia Day and he wants us to celebrate Australia as in all of Australia, as in Indigenous Australians, new Australians, but also the founding migrants who built this country. And then there was all footage of, red-haired, freckle-faced, blue-eyed Australians walking around the speech room. So for my money, that is a very clever tactic, a very clever speechwriter to honour what we've been saying. I think he even said the original, the OG Australians, which we talk about all the time, Jason.
Really interesting, isn't it? That the subtle nuance of being able to introduce that subject, and you know it works when you don't get a retaliation in the Guardian calling Peter Dutton xenophobic, if that makes sense. So,
Mm.
because anytime you ever want to defend your own position, you are told that you can't because the woke rescuers come out and of course want to find somebody who's doing it tougher than anyone else, and they're the ones that need to be stuck up for. But at the end of the
Mm.
day, it's the middle class that always pays. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and the middle class pay the bills. And that's how it has always been. To the point there is no middle class. You have an upper middle class in Australia, and you have a working class.
Oh,
And the
I've
work
fallen into the working class 100%, but that's okay. I mean, it is what it is. I do think it's interesting because we often say on this show, and I do believe that someone said to me at the speech on Sunday, actually, with Russell, that what you do, she said to me, it's not about, and she works within politics, this person. She said, it's not necessarily what you say or how you say, it's the fact that you just say it. And she said, what you do personally is you create an umbrella of bravery. You're very brave and you can go out there and say it. And so underneath your umbrella, people feel comfortable to have their say because you've been so brave, which really touched me. But what's happening is we encourage everyday Australians to use their voice while they still can and speak their truth. But I think we've actually also encouraged our politicians to do the same, Jason.
Well, absolutely. Isn't that interesting what we're seeing? So, in terms of our show, so we start off virtually nowhere and 65 episodes strong now. And it's interesting that you would almost think that Peter Dutton was listening into the show.
Yeah, or his speechwriter, because it's not about them. They are puppets. I mean, they are. Because they're always referring to their notes and speeches. And that's something I don't like about Anthony Albanese. Because, love him or hate him, when Trump gets up there, of course he has talking points, but he's so into them and he's so discussed them at length. He doesn't go in blind that he just stands there and talks to the press pack about what's going on because he's across it. It's like working with someone in business that refers to notes. It's like, aren't you fully across it? And they're not because Anthony Albanese is clearly doing the bidding of someone else, which is very uncomfortable because he's at the end of his term now. Also, something very important that I was looking at yesterday, because he's called the election, he is now officially, and I shared the website, what's called a caretaker government, right?
Hmm.
So he can't make big decisions. So this thing that happened at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm not sure of the timing. So it either happened at 4 o'clock in the morning that they brought in these rules about, protected classes and you can't insult or offend anyone. Happened at 4 o'clock in the morning, which is outrageous. They do it deliberately so that everyone's exhausted in the room and just says, oh, whatever, just let it pass through. If this happened after he called the election, he wasn't allowed to do that because you're not allowed to make any major decisions in a caretaker government that the next administration would have to live by. So I haven't yet had time to look at that, but it's very important, this caretaker government thing. You're not meant to make big decisions. You're not meant to push the country in a particular direction. And he's not meant to be out there, as he was yesterday, for hours and hours talking about and making decisions about these Trump tariffs, because you can't make big decisions as a caretaker government. So that's worth looking into as well if you're into research.
Absolutely, no, they are not, and that's what a caretaker government is all about. So, when that happens, there is a process, and that's why it's a campaign of what, 5 weeks. Interestingly, I made the comment last week that they don't actually announce that the campaign starts officially until about 10 days before, and that's to do with fundraising loopholes that they're able to exploit because that's what politicians do. They pretend that they're honest, they pretend that they're in control, and they run the game to suit themselves at
Oh,
all
they're
costs.
fundraising in the background. They're not meant to be, but they are 100%. They don't need to anyway. They've got their backers and it's the New World Order.
Now, on a different note, I noticed yesterday my follower numbers are starting to trickle up off my reasonably new X account,
You're
and
welcome. You're welcome.
thank you very much. And it's interesting how that process works,
Mm.
and so you have to create. You can create great content, and sometimes you think, oh, this has got to be the one. This is provocative and it's interesting and etc. And hopefully this will be the thing that makes a difference. And of course, it gets absolutely no traction at all, and that's another one that just evaporates. And then a year later, someone else will share something similar, and it'll get a million views. I'm astounded at the inane comments that people put up there on X, and like it might be a sentence, and it has 100,000 views. I'm like, how does that even get traction? So anyway, I noticed that one of my followers was And We Know, who is LT Master Sergeant, who runs a very popular podcast. He had 190,000 followers on X, and he's got hundreds and hundreds of thousands of followers on Rumble and etc. And he's a bit like Dave from X22. So for those that know who he is, I thought that was pretty cool. And I was wondering how it was that he found me, because he hadn't liked or commented on any of my stuff. But maybe it was because of the interview I did with Michael Yon for the 51st State, which was really happy with that interview. Even though I only got to ask him about 3 or 4 questions, Michael just kept going with incredible information. It was a bit like what we call a Robin Williams interview in the trade, that you simply say hello and then you say goodbye at the end and just let him go. But and Michael had so much to say, particularly about the 5 threats facing us, etc. But my daughter messaged me and said, "Hey, Dad, have you noticed that Nicola has a follower who I follow, and that is John Cena from the WWE, the wrestling. John Cena follows you, Nicola. That's pretty cool."
That is super cool. Let me tell you about social media. It's a weird animal, right? And I've worked this out now, and it's obviously working because my follower numbers shot up as well. You can put all the vitally important content and effort you want into posts. And this radio show, even though they love me on X, is very shadow banned. Every few months people go, "Oh, you're back. I haven't seen you for 6 months." And I'm like, "You bastards." But what you need to do, and this is what politicians play on as well, is they know that the everyday person likes the simple, salacious stuff, right? And so every now and then you have to put up this mindless post that is sort of something that you might see in a magazine, something a bit gossipy, something on Facebook that when you're scrolling through your feed, you'd stop and look at. And the most recent interesting one that got me loads more followers was a post where I put what Melinda Gates used to look like on the left, and what they're telling us is Melinda Gates in middle to later middle age on the right. And I just wrote, "There is no way on God's earth this is the same person." And that got millions of views and hundreds of thousands of likes and shares, because everyone feels the same, like this can't be real. And what happens is that gets shared globally. Same thing happened when I commented on the LA fires, because all the trees didn't burn, which was really odd. And every now and then you have to put one of those things up. If you put anything up to do with Bill Gates, it tends to go viral, because right now I think he's probably the most hated man on the planet. So that's something to think about if you're trying to build your pages up.
So in terms of that Melinda Gates character, that's Kevin Kline playing Mrs. Doubtfire, I'm certain, in that
Yeah, it
photograph.
certainly looks that way.
And if you look at Kevin Kline's teeth and Melinda Gates's teeth, it's an interesting one. So yeah, I've always fascinated with those lookalike things. That the Joe Biden, the earlobe one is interesting. He's got a hanging earlobe in the old days, and now it's an attached
He has had
earlobe.
a number of facelifts though, Jason. Come on.
Still don't know how you attach an earlobe from a hanging earlobe. That's kind of a weird one, but let's see how that goes. But there are plenty of other ones that just look very odd. And so you can only ask more and more questions. Now it was an old video that turned up in a feed, and it was Scott Adams, the Dilbert character, and it was from back in 2023, and he said, "Anti-vaxxers hold the advantage." He said, "Distrust of government and big corporations is never wrong, and if you distrusted the government and big corporations, you won." So what we know about government is that they want to force us to trust them. And that's what we heard during COVID. Jacinda Ardern was about one of the worst you'd see. "We will tell you what to believe." Even Chris Cuomo on CNN said the same thing. "We will tell you what to believe." Like, get lost. And then, of course, Daniel Andrews, Mr. Standover Man, old CCP friend Andrews was the worst here in Australia, but he wasn't much, not far behind, of course, as Michael Gunner in Northern Territory, who lost the plot.
Well, Andrew's eyes and Gunner's eyes both were quite strange when they were delivering that stuff. They kind of went off in different directions, which they don't always do. both of them had fear in their faces, and it was like you just knew there was a handler off to the side of the stage,
Mm.
looking at them like, you better say it, you better do it.
Absolutely. Now, Scott Adams then said natural immunity was the way to go. If you didn't take the vax, you should take victory. He said people like me who took it, you should pity. And so, doing a little bit of sort of background research, I dig up this PolitiFact fact check from January 26th of 2023, and it says, no, Dilbert creator is wrong about the unvaccinated. They face more risk of COVID-19 infection and death. So as usual, and it says if your time is short, it says data has consistently showed that unvaccinated people are at greater risk than vaccinated people of getting infected by COVID-19 and dying from it. Well, we now know that that is 100% bullshit. COVID-19 vaccines have a strong safety record, and infection alone provides only limited protection. Bullshit. So what they're saying is that mRNA is better than natural immunity. So we now know that that is bullshit.
Well, it tried to get me. I think that's pretty much their little plaything.
It says,
Excuse me, tried to get me yesterday, and 24 hours later I'm back. So that's a lie.
Exactly. So there is resilience. Now, usually vaccine side effects are minor and emerge within days, not years later. Some people who get COVID-19 experience long COVID, physical effects that can last for years. Again, obfuscation and total bullshit, because we're now told that long COVID is a vaccine side effect. And this obfuscation in the wording, usually vaccine side effects are minor. So in other words, if you're unusual, so how do you define unusual? 49% or 1%?
Yeah.
So, if it's the majority, it's really interesting how these people will push you under a bridge in order to perpetuate their own bias and their own lie.
I
And of
think
course,
it's because they don't look, if they've had it, Jason, and if I'd had it, I wouldn't want to believe this stuff either. So I do have sympathy there. And, he talks about, the other guy said you need to pity them. I don't pity anyone. I just worry for them, which is why I've done everything I've done over the last 5 years. But as I say, everyone I know who hasn't had the carrot, the injection, it's not like they never get sick. Things try and get them, like something tried to get me yesterday. I look like something from a Boris Karloff movie for most of yesterday. One of the guys I work with, who's, like an on the tools kind of guy, he said to me, he said, Jesus, your husband must have woke up this morning and thought he was in bed with the wrong person. I'm like, cheers, mate.
wow.
But it was a 24-hour thing, right? Because I consider myself, even though I'm middle-aged, to be reasonably healthy, and I provide my body with the things that it needs to repair. And that's not so easy when you've become a medical experiment, is it?
No, absolutely. Well, the final point on that is that PolitiFact, who was the fact checker, is funded by the Poynter Institute, Poynter, and it has funders of Craig Newmark of Craigslist, the Charles Koch Foundation. There are many others, of course. If you dig in, and I have dug in the past, you will therefore see Bill Gates's name turn up, etc., etc. So, in other words, these people that are perpetuating these lies as so-called fact checks are funded by the people who benefit from the jabs. You all know that, but what I'm getting to here is that when you actually turn your intuition into fact, and then you go and do a dig on Poynter Institute, you will find it in black and white right there. Now, interestingly, as I've gone back in recent history over and over again to re-dig up these facts, because you have to have an encyclopedic knowledge, and you can't. I don't have the infrastructure to just file all these documents away in folders and folders to go back to later. So you just research it again based on memory, and you'll find that it's been manipulated. So where you went last time to say who the benefactors were, that page of
Yes.
benefactors will be adjusted, which I find fascinating. So
Memory hold, they call it, don't they?
it's really interesting, isn't it? So I look back at the last 5 years, and I often think, should I have really set up a database for video clips and filing, etc.? And I'm sure people have done that, but
I have a file for the memes all the way through from 2020. Not so much the documents, because your phone constantly says, "Oh, you've got no storage," and it forces you to get rid of stuff. But I kept a file on my laptop of all the memes and all the things that were said about the politicians. And one day I'll release a coffee table book on those because they're very amusing.
And you're not wrong either. The amount of photographs that I'm sure that many of us keep, tens of thousands, in fact. And I go through my phone, and in between the photos, so yeah, meme, news clip, etc. And that's been a good thing. But again, it's taking the time to be able to file and process that stuff. But you're right, we would be able to release encyclopedic coffee table books at least in terms of the stuff that will chronicle history. And yet here we do the same thing here on this show 65. Nicola, can you believe that we're at the end of week 13 of this it's no longer a brand new project. We're in our second quarter. If you were going to have to release a financial statement soon.
We've reached retirement age. Well, the original retirement age, 65. I think they've risen it, all over the world since then. But yeah, it's sort of become part of our lives now, and I think it probably has become part of the lives of the listeners. And I got messages yesterday saying, "Oh, I wish I was rich because I'd fund you because I could do with 2 hours a day of this," which is absolutely adorable. So thank you for sending those messages. Very much appreciated. Should we get to those news headlines, Jason? What time is it? We can't tell the time because we're pre-record, but we are almost halfway through the show.
Yeah, well, we're not that bad. We're 20 minutes in, but I've got a lot of news today about the tariffs. So let's work through it for you. So if you are part of Trump's America, this is Liberation Day. The day the tariffs were announced was to rebalance the trade deficits, with tariffs designed to balance the balance of payments. In other words, what goes out of the country versus what comes into the country, and calculations have been made to show that. In turn, this extra government revenue will offset the need for other taxes collected, such as income tax. So whilst always given a choice to buy locally made, where prices won't increase, particularly if inputs, that is, factors of production, are also American, but with the added bonus of paying little to no tax. This is the advantage of the tariffs: more money in your pocket, more money in the government's coffers to build new and needed infrastructure in a country that is clearly decaying. Trump's tariffs are designed to correct it. Now, Trump made his first comments since imposing the tariffs Wednesday. The stock markets plunged and countries readied for their response to the levying of the tariffs. Trump said it's all fine. He said the operation is over, the patient lived and is healing. He wrote, "The prognosis is that the patient will be stronger, bigger, better, and more resilient than ever before." Meanwhile, more than $21 billion was wiped off the Australian share market on Thursday after the announcement. The S&P ASX 200 closed down 74 points, or 0.94%, so less than 1%. It's clear that countries facing a trade imbalance, decay becomes evidence. That's an important point there that we'll talk about a bit later on. So there are countries like China that have a surplus and they have expansion, and you have countries like America that have a trade deficit and that there is a decay. Australia is always guilty of that we never seem to have enough money for the infrastructure, and we see decay in areas of our cities and our country areas. Meanwhile, so detractors are coming up with all forms of criticism, not least of which is the stock market correction, where we saw some corporations taking a tumble in the vicinity of 3 or 4%. Meanwhile, Albo, whilst standing on 2 feet, said US tariffs on Australian exports were unwarranted. "This is not the act of a friend," Albanese said. "I wish I could actually do that with an Albanese voice, but I feel like people would say that I'm picking on him, that little old me would be picking on the PM, but I'm going to have to work on my impression of Albo for next week, I think." Now, all countries will have a baseline tariff of 10% on all imports. On top of that, the US charges reciprocal tariffs on certain countries at approximately half their existing rate of levies on US-made goods. So in other words, the world is saying, we're allowed to tariff you, but you can't tariff us. And Trump goes, well, we're going to tariff you, but only half what you're doing. Meanwhile, Mexico said it won't hit the US with retaliatory tariffs, despite that putting it at a disadvantage. Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum said the lack of new tariffs was good for the country. This is in contrast to Canada, which has announced a retaliatory 25% tariff on US cars entering the nation. Good on you, Carney. A study by Yale University has found the average US household will have to fork out, ready for this, $2,100 extra per year to the Trump administration's tariffs announced yesterday. That's 3,300 Australian dollars. That's about what your electricity bill went up under Albo, despite him telling it's going down. So that jumped substantially when all tariffs since he took office are added in. Meanwhile, Trump has acknowledged that there could be some economic pain, but he's insisted that over the longer term, Americans will be better off due to more jobs within the country. But some economists are doubtful, pointing at the reason behind many imports like clothes is because they are cheaper to make overseas. But they also break, don't they? They wear out. An analysis by the Budget Lab at Yale found the lowest income households would need to find an extra $980 US per year, about 1,500 Australian. And one of the world's biggest car firms says it will temporarily lay off workers in the US, Mexico, and Canada and idle plants while it digests the Trump tariffs. And the company, which makes Peugeot, Chrysler, Ram, Citroën, and Fiat, among others, for 2 weeks, they will shut their plant and they make Chrysler and Dodge cars for North America in Canada. Well, all they need to do is go over the border into Detroit and start there, and it's all over. They're saying that 4,500 workers will be affected. Meanwhile, metal stocks took a tumble, with silver off as much as 7% off peaks this week, and gold pulling back about 2%. Also, Senator Chuck Grassley, the Republican, introduced a bill with left Senator Maria Cantwell, a Democrat, which could almost certainly put Trump's tariffs entirely on ice. The legislation's stated purpose is to reassert the legislative branch's power over tariff policy. The Trade Review Act of 2025 requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of imposing new tariffs. The president must also present a detailed rationale and analysis of the potential consequences for American businesses and consumers. Moreover, the legislation will require all tariffs to be approved by Congress within 60 days, or they will automatically expire. Now, they're at it again. Australians have been urged to get a flu vaccine as cases surge across the country, almost doubling in one state. The National Notifiable Diseases Surveillance System reported there have been more than 46,000 cases across Australia this year to the end of March. We do have 26 million people, by the way, and an increase of about 50% from last year. The report showed 67 people in Queensland had been hospitalised with the flu, and another 900 were diagnosed in 1 week. I can't believe we know the diagnosis of flus, for goodness sake. More than 10,000 flu cases have been reported in Victoria, with numbers continuing to rise and almost double the amount of cases compared to the same time last year. What would that be the cause? What would be causing that, question mark? Now, the film director Steven Soderbergh has terrifying ideas for a sequel to his movie Contagion from 2011 about a global pandemic which enjoyed a resurgence under COVID-19, but feels it would be irresponsible to base a movie around them. We talk about it and have come up with some terrifying ideas, Soderbergh said, while describing conversations with pandemic experts. They would have to be, I think, a plot, but that doesn't feel predictable. I don't want to torture people, he said. There are scenarios that you could come up with that I could categorize as irresponsible, that I would go, that's a big idea, but I'm not sure I want to put that idea out there. Frankly, I do think about that. Well, in other health news, Dr. Peter McCullough reports 127,350 cases of measles were recorded in Europe in 2024. Funny how no one says that when talking about Bobby Kennedy. A neocon bloodbath occurred at the National Security Council Thursday, and it may be Laura Loomer, the journalist, to thank for it. CNN has reported that President Trump fired at least 3 National Security Council staffers at the agency. The terminations occurred a day after Loomer visited the Oval and met with Trump. During the meeting, CNN reported that she asked Trump to fire several National Security Council staff members, including his principal deputy National Security Advisor, Alex Wong. Brian Walsh, a director for intelligence and former lead staffer for now Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Thomas Boudry, a senior director for legislative affairs who formerly served as NSA Director Mike Waltz's legislative director in Congress. And David Feith, a senior director overseeing technology and national security. He previously served in the State Department during Trump's first administration. And the Department of Government Efficiency has continued to find outrageous abuses and wastes of taxpayer money. While digging through contracts for the Department of Veterans Affairs, a previous contract was uncovered, exposing hundreds of thousands of dollars paid out per month to do minor, routine website maintenance. On Wednesday, Doe shared on X good work by the Department of Veterans Affairs, previously paying out $380,000 a month for minor website modifications. And Joe Biden's former chief of staff has opened up about his mental decline. Ron Klain, who served as Biden's White House chief of staff from 2021 to 2023 and then returned to help him with debate prep in 2024, is quoted in an upcoming book saying that the president had no idea what was really going on. According to The Guardian, Klain claimed that Biden didn't know what Trump had been saying and couldn't grasp what the back and forth was. During debate preparation, Biden reportedly left and fell asleep by the pool. Nicola.
Oh my God, that's not very heartening, is it? I just want to say that very quickly, we mentioned yesterday about, well, we mentioned again this morning, this list that went through at 4 o'clock in the morning of Australia of who is a protected class, and it was people with AIDS and HIV and gay community, trans community, various religions, new Australians, blah, blah, blah. I noticed on that list, just want to point out that one of the protected classes was not differing political opinions, which if you're going to be protecting people, that should be in there, right? If you've got democracy in a country, we should be protected enough to have opposing political speech, but of course they're never going to do that. Now, yesterday with the Trump tariffs, again, looking at the television, although one of my eyes was closed and not working, I noticed he was holding a big board and he made it very clear this was a message to the world, whether you had the volume on your TV or not. And I was contacted by a woman. I think she said she was a nurse and she'd studied in a psychology module. They actually taught her to interview people, to speak to people who were struggling mentally and emotionally, and then watch the interview back with the sound off, which is very interesting because you can get a lot more from body language than from words. Very, very interesting, her message was. So thank you for that. But Trump held up this board, the tariff board, and it said on it, at the top in big letters, reciprocal tariffs. So I started trying to concentrate, going, well, what does that mean, reciprocal tariffs? And then it was later stated sort of very quickly and blah, 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 at the end of the news in Australia that these US tariffs on Australia at 10% are reciprocal, that Australia's had 10% tariffs on American stuff for years. So how dare Albo, the new caretaker Prime Minister of nowhere, stand up there and say this is not the action of a friend when Australia has been doing the same thing, Jason?
This is the point. And so I read somewhere this morning someone complaining that this is the usual story. Trump doesn't know what he's doing. Trump's an idiot. The usual stuff. It even comes out of Albo's mouth. Now, last time I looked, Donald Trump, 78 years of age, is a billionaire businessman who has been a businessman pretty much since he was a boy. So let's give him 50 years generously. I mean, conservatively. 50 years. Albo, what job have you ever had that wasn't government paid or union paid? Have you ever had a job, mate? Nothing.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. Then you get these analysts that come out. Now, all of them, this is what they do. They all live on the margins. Oh, the stock market went down, so therefore it's shit. Well, of course the stock market goes down. It's called an adjustment. The stock market always has corrections and adjustments, and half the time the stock market is completely a bull market based on the fact that it's in motion. It's acting as a Ponzi scheme. It's just an expansion. This is the thing that I could never.
Transference of wealth, right? People buy stocks and shares and they put, important money for their future into it. And then, more people lose that money so that the other people can gain. It's definitely corrupt. I feel like Trump is essentially, and I put a little post up about this yesterday, just a picture. Trump is essentially, it feels like now, trying to make the United States of America a lifeboat away from the globalists, like they're sailing off away from globalization. Now, that's all great, and I support that and I cheerlead that. But the problem is, what are we left with here? Because what Albanese was saying yesterday, as well as this caretaker PM, and shouldn't be really saying anything too important, just go away and worry about your campaign, dude. He was saying all kinds of things like, if we're not going to align with America, we'll align more strongly with Europe. Well, that's the last thing we want in Australia, because all of this New World Order stuff comes from Europe. It comes from Brussels. And because foreign interference in Australian democracy is still a crime, why is he doing that? Because we do have mass migration into Australia the way they do in the UK, the way they do in France. They've destroyed Paris, the way they do in Germany and Sweden. And we're seeing the incidence of rape and sexual assault go up, violence in the streets, yada, yada. And so though Trump is making America a lifeboat, I'm very concerned which direction Australia will go in. But again, it doesn't make any sense. We've got heaps of American military bases here. So I feel like the Australian government generally on both sides, they're a bit sort of adrift with no oars. They don't seem to know what's going on right now.
Well, there's a lot to say about it, and this is why I came up with the concept for the new show, The 51st State. I want to challenge it. I keep saying Australia can't be a servant to three masters. We're a servant
they've invested too heavy in aligning, walking in lockstep with globalization in Australia. That's the problem.
Of course it is. And we just have to do what Trump did by getting new leadership that says we're no longer globalists. That's the problem with Peter Dutton. He is a servant now to globalism and nationalism. What he's doing, he's a globalist 100%. And what he's doing is he's feigning like a sidestep or in a football match or a soccer, and he's pointing over to nationalists and he's trying to get you to look, and he's getting the nationalists to go, yeah, he's one of us. And then he's going to go straight back to globalism the moment he takes over
Well, he's
the
all
lodge.
very smiley now, but people need to remember he's a former, chief of police type guy, and when you talk about standing over people, he's a very large, imposing man. He does have the stature of Trump, but you see him standing over people, and these guys, they're forcing the smiles and the happiness because that won't be how they behave once they get in.
This is the point, isn't it? It's ask, vote first, ask questions later was the theme, the name of the theme for the movie Bob Roberts, a documentary that came out back in the early 90s starring Tim Robbins, who played a Bill Clinton-like character. And it's the same exact story each time. I want to make the point about with the stock market and when we think about it. So superannuation, which became compulsory back in the early 90s, give or take, 3% of your income was to be paid by the employer into a super fund. Well, that's now over 10%, heading towards 12%, give or take again. Now, if you think the average income in Australia is $1,600 a week and there are 15 million workers, so that's $160 a week at 10% that's being accumulated into superannuation, or $240 million every week is paid into super. 240 million.
That's a
How
lot.
many Telstra shares can you possibly buy in your superannuation portfolio every week? Another 200, like let's say 5% of that, $12 million worth of Telstra shares every week in superannuation is accumulated. Telstra shares are lower now than they were 25 years ago. So I can never understand this idea of the stock market being the response. Like, you can't keep putting money into these companies that aren't exactly making huge profits and
Hmm.
expecting without a necessary infrastructure.
Well,
Now,
why aren't
people,
they making huge profits? Phone bills are huge in this country.
well, again, I mean, there has been a switch from the landline to the mobile. There's been a switch from phone lines to data, and it's all about internet. And so you always get new competition and new things, etc. Now, interestingly, Commonwealth Bank shares, when they first were floated, when Keating did that, you could buy them for I think $2.50. Commonwealth Bank share today, I think it's $153. So that was a pretty good investment in the bank because they can consistently increase their profits year on year. They were the first to get over $1 billion in net profits, and now they're at sort of $10 or $15 billion in net profits annually. And it was, I think it was Ross Gittins or an economist like that said you're probably better off putting your money into bank shares than you are putting it into the bank. And of course you are.
Huh, interesting.
And so that's a good example there. And so when there's a haircut, a correction of stocks in a day because of this, like Costco went down in the US 3.5%, Bank of America down 3.7, Coca-Cola was only off 0.39, T-Mobile, these are US stocks down 3%.
Well, I've let my Costco membership lapse. We're not going back ever again. And I used to love Costco, and that's because they were very totalitarian during COVID. And I went, you know what? Screw you. You can keep your business.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because I remember I went down to Costco to get something, and I got to the front door during this period, and I looked up because I wasn't going near them if they had imposed any restrictions such as vaccine passports or whatever.
Mm.
And I got down there, or I rang them in advance, and they gave me contradictory information. And I thought, no way in the world, I'm paying for this damn membership. And I
Yeah.
rang them up, and I got onto head office and I asked them for a clarification, and they actually said that the shop was wrong. And you know what they did? They rang the local shop down in the Newcastle one, and they got them to update where they were going, and so that was dropped immediately. So I have to say that they do react when there's an incorrect thing there. But there's many things about Costco that I don't like, such as now when you go in, you have to show your ID and you have to buzz it in at the door, as you used to just flash it to the person at the door. It's kind of weird. Have you worked out why, when you go through Costco and you give them your shopping list as you walk out the door, you dock it and they put the highlighter pen on it? Have you
No.
noticed that? When you walk
Yeah, I
out,
know they do it, but what do you mean work it out?
so they someone sets at the door with a clipboard, and you
Aren't
hand
they
them
checking what's in your trolley?
yeah, but then they get the highlighter pen. Have you worked out why they put the highlighter pen?
No.
Okay, so the only thing that I can work out, and tell me if I'm wrong, listeners, they must highlight the docket so that you can't take that docket back inside and fill up your trolley again and walk out and go, that's what I've got. There's
Oh,
no
they
other
do.
reason.
They do look in the trolley though. I find it's really weird, right? I find it's like they think everyone's a thief. The way
Yes.
they actually put their hands in the trolley if you've bought a lot and they move stuff around and they check it off on the receipt and it's like I've just been through the register, like 50 feet away. It's very rude. I don't like the whole process. And when you come out from the register, there's like a little foodie area, and the
Mm.
food that they serve there is so revolting and disgusting, and people literally like eat it up. And you have to go, it's like a famous burger joint where they have like a screen and you have to press what you want. And kids love it, you see, because it's rubbish and they're just putting this awful food into children. So I thought the whole way this place is carrying itself, I don't like it anymore. And also, I've noticed that. We used to occasionally get like the little lamb chops there, the nice tiny ones. But I started noticing that they almost look 3D printed. I'm not saying they are, but every single chop looked exactly the same in every single packet, like every single chop. How is that possible? Like every single mark, every single bit of fat, every single tail was exactly the same. That's not possible unless you're cloning sheep somewhere. How's that possible?
That's interesting, isn't it? They certainly represent value in the lamb department. I can't say the same for the beef department. I always found that, I mean, the beef is export quality, if you will, but it's the most expensive beef I've ever seen.
It's a
And I don't.
shame. I used to really enjoy going to Costco, particularly at Christmas. They'd have some American things and different things. And you'd always think, well, I get a discount, I buy in bulk. And I always used to buy in bulk from Costco. Obviously, that's the point. But what happens is you go in because you need something, and I usually needed two or three items, which I don't even use anymore, so I have no reason to go. But then you end up leaving and you've spent $300 or $400 and you bought loads of stuff you didn't need. So that's one of the reasons I stopped going. But really, their treatment of us during COVID, they went crazy. They thought we were all going to, kill their staff with the flu. And the fact that Australia is now pushing this new flu vax, right? And you're saying that 69 people were hospitalised in Queensland for flu. I believe people have always been hospitalised for flus and pneumonias and stuff like that because it's these fragile members of society, the elderly, pre-existing conditions and whatever. But they never tell us if these people were jabbed with mRNA. We never get to know that now. It's like it's not important. They want us to forget it, but it is important because I think after what I've been through for the last 24 hours, if I were jabbed, things would be a lot worse for me. And also with these measles outbreaks, right? Who's getting these measles? Are they the children of vaccinated people? Are they vaccinated children? We don't get to know those figures at all because now they're just saying, oh, you were all wrong. Everything's fine. They didn't do any harm. No, that's not true. I saw the Forest of the Fallen on Sunday and young people are dying who've had this jab.
No, exactly right. And it's a very good point that you make. Again, it's the nuance. I'm going to read off details of another story in the Murdoch press. It says, one Australian state is desperately trying to contain a measles outbreak with infected people visiting 53 locations in just over 3 weeks, including a busy pub. So
Oh, so
pause
they're
there.
tracking them.
Okay, so, well, yeah, this is what's happening, right? Hang on a second. Haven't you told us that everyone's taken the MMR jab? So what the hell is the problem? Anyway,
Yeah.
there have been 12 cases of confirmed measles in WA since March the 19th. So in 2 weeks, 12 cases in an outbreak. We just had 127,000 in Europe in a year. No one said a word. If you divide that, that's 10,000 a month. That's 2,500 a week, or a week. What's that? 350 a day. No one says a word. The most recent, identified on April the 2nd, is linked to a case in a person who recently returned from Pakistan.
Huh.
Other 10 are part of a larger outbreak involving the Hakia Prison, Bunbury Regional Prison, and Bunbury Regional Hospital, a statement from WAL Head said. So the institutions are the ones that are failing.
You've
And
just
it's,
given me chills. You've just made me realize something. So the OG Australians all got injected with an experimental mRNA gene altering therapy. And then we import people from the third world. And the third world is not a highly vaccinated with anything population, not MMR, not TB, not anything. And they were also not required to have mRNA to come into Australia. I know that for a fact. So they bring in whatever they bring in from the third world. And this is what I said yesterday about equity isn't about leveling them up to where we are. It's about leveling us down, because now all the Australians that have been a medical experiment and may have struggling immune systems are being exposed to what? The third world.
That is the point, isn't it? So, however, we look at it both ways. This person who got the measles from Pakistan or returned, what's their condition? Are they going to? Now, here's the thing. They will likely now in a hospital be forced to take an MMR whilst with measles, which is an
Well, you
absolute
don't
no-no.
do that. You don't
Exactly.
do
It's
that.
an absolute no-no.
No.
So now they will have natural immunity. But at the end of the day, it's just the flipping measles, people.
It's a
For goodness
rash.
sake.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's a rash that goes away in a few days. Now, we're going to be vilified for that. You can't say that people die. Of course, people die of everything. People die from falling over like Albanese. People die in car accidents. Where there is movement, there is risk, there is death. You can be knocked over by a car doing 1 kilometre an hour. Does that mean we reduce all cars to half a kilometre an hour, for goodness
And you
sake?
can die from the injections because, as people have had to say in open court, no, we didn't do any research on how it would affect children, but we're saying it's safe for children and pregnant women. I mean, they've literally said this stuff, right? So basically, human beings should be able to choose. Those who've been indoctrinated into the idea, and there are many in healthcare, there are many in childcare, our own GPs that have been indoctrinated. Oh no, vaccines work. Being a medical experiment is absolutely fine. They used to have to pay people, by the way, tens of thousands of dollars to be a medical experiment. You could choose to do it as almost a job. And there's a very funny clip. Probably the funniest film, one of the funniest films ever made, is called Fun with Dick and Jane. And if you get to, it's got Taya Leone in it, and oh God, what's his name? That funny guy from The Mask. Anyway,
Was it Jim Carrey?
Jim Carrey and Taya Leone. Taya Leone
Yes.
is my all-time favorite actress, and I know she's a very commercial actress, and that probably surprises everyone that it's not like Judi Dench. But I love Taya Leone. I love that she's tall and skinny and goofy, and everything she does is just hilarious. If you want a fun afternoon, pour yourself a glass of wine and watch Fun with Dick and Jane. You will laugh until you cry. And he loses his job and they go broke and they can't pay their mortgage and the house is getting foreclosed on. And she decides to earn money. She'll become a medical experiment. So she goes in, she fills in the form, and she has no idea what they're going to do to her. And what she ends up being put in is a lab where they're testing for women, like Botox in the lip and filler in the face. She comes out, and I swear to God, she looks like she's been stung by like 1,000 bees. And it's just hilarious. And for the rest of the movie, it takes like weeks and weeks for her face to go down. But this is the thing, right? You can laugh about it. You can't laugh about it these days because no one got paid to be a medical experiment. Quite the opposite. And actually, someone I worked with yesterday who is considering having their partner works in childcare and they're considering having the whooping cough vaccine, and they were told they'd have to pay $84. So people are paying to get this stuff, and I believe there's mRNA in the whooping cough now. That would have to be confirmed, but not only are they doing this to Australians, they're getting them to pay for it, Jason. It's utter madness. It's meant to be the other way around.
Yeah, exactly right. So now we're paying for your harm. And of course, if you pay for it, well, there should be a responsibility. But at the same time, people love to own after they buy is the concept. So that if they've paid for it, they're going to be double down and be more invested in it.
Yeah, it's why you have to pay when you rescue a puppy or a kitten, because if you're financially invested in it, you're more likely to take care of it. And unfortunately, that's human nature.
Now, back onto the sort of the flu stuff and the measles stuff, the one thing that is never ever discussed, and in fact the opposite holds, is preparation. So in this particular article, I'm going to go back to it. And what I didn't read out was 2 paragraphs later, it said, anyone who attended the exposure locations during the dates and time listed is urged to monitor for symptoms.
Oh, here we go again. Exposure location.
But again, monitor for symptoms. Well, for goodness sake. So, okay. So so what you've told me is oh my God, I've gone into the wrong place. Oh my God, I've been exposed. Oh my God, I've got to monitor for symptoms. Oh my God, what are they?
You're on a list. You're yellow starred. I feel like because I talked about being sick for 24 hours yesterday, I'll go into work today and the hazmat team's going to rock up.
But exactly. But here's the symptoms: fever, fatigue, cough, runny nose, and sore eyes with a red, not itchy rash. So, okay, emerging 3 or 4 days later. So 4 days later, you scratch your nose. Oh my God, I must have the measles. But here's the thing: they never talk about preparation. They never talk about things that you can actually do
Well, they
to
never
boost
talk
your
about
immune system.
diet. They never say juice some oranges. Don't buy an orange juice in a bottle from BlackRock or one of the BlackRock supermarkets. Actually, buy oranges and juice them, which, by the way, you need to do. They never tell people to take zinc. They never tell people to take quercetin. All these lovely, beautiful, natural things that go boom and help you bounce back and likely helped me bounce back. They never push any of that stuff. Well, it doesn't cost very much, right? It's $5
Well,
for a bag of oranges.
the first thing I noticed during COVID was as we moved into the winter months, around about Easter time, is kind of when everyone sort of pays attention, daylight saving ends, etc., was that the ads on TV for Chemist Warehouse and those places advertise olive leaf extract and echinacea and all these sort of natural remedies. During COVID, there was not a single advertisement anywhere for
Nope.
anything.
Banned.
Anything. It was almost as if COVID and the flu were different things.
Mm.
And anything that was out at the time, like even though the symptoms are the same, well, completely different. They talked about that for years. And of course, then hang on, where are all the flu cases? Well, that's because you're locked down, there's no flu. Well, if we're locked down, how come there's COVID? Oh, well, we won't go into that one. So again, the idea that you can't prep. Now, let's think about it again. You just mentioned the diet and people shopping and going to the Costco fast food outlet and the food quality being ordinary.
Yeah.
Think of how many people have bad diets. Like, when you walk through the shops and you see someone
All.
um, and you see someone limping in, or you just notice things. You'll notice people with massive swollen legs
Oh, it's terrible. The swollen legs in Australia are terrible. I used to photograph this stuff in America when I was behind one of the multiple obese persons in America. They had to turn sideways to get through the trolley gap that was big enough for the trolley at the store, but not big enough for an American. They had to turn sideways to get their big bubble butts through it, right? That's how big they are. And in Australia, you're right. I'm noticing, I think it's called oedema officially, which is water and swelling on the legs, which you can get when you're pregnant and other conditions. But these people are living with this permanently. And I wonder if they were like this pre-pandemic, Jason.
it's a good point. Where I'm going, or where I wanted to go with it, was basically to explain how you must be able to that not everyone is the same. And so for those people that are eating as healthy as they possibly can, and that becomes more and more difficult because you go to the supermarket and the lack of nutrition in the fresh food produce is lessening.
Mm.
Many people are now concerned about how their meat has grown, whether it's got bovea or something in it that's got another distant side effect in the future. And
Sterilization, yeah.
exactly. So you certainly don't want to give it to your children.
Mm.
So you have to be more and more concerned. But yeah, look, it is a battle that we have been fighting for years, but it's all coming to the fore. And when you see the negotiation, this is the point that bugs me. People will come out and say in the third party movement, so and so is controlled opposition. Well, hang on a second. Peter Dutton is the ultimate in controlled opposition. He
Yeah.
gets to play. He gets to play Timu Trump conveniently. He gets to say that he's going to point to the nationalists. He is a globalist. He's going to follow the uni party way, and all he's going to do is you watch anything that concerns a globalist outlook. He's going to support it.
Oh,
And
he's
anything
way
that
scarier than Albo as well. Albo's like a buffoon who falls off the stage and lisps and, wears an orange turban. Dutton is a former police chief. He's going to come down hard on us. You need to understand that.
And so I look at it and go, there's no lesser of two evils. I don't want either of them, but we're gonna have to tolerate one of them. So strategically, I think we're better off with Dutton, not because he's going to be better or worse than Albo, but because of this one reason and one reason only. He will be the last of these one-term prime ministers from the major parties. He will force the revolution in 2028, which is entirely where my political interest lies. That is my prediction. That is what I am working towards.
Now, if they were smart, he'd be a nice PM so that wasn't forced, right? He would try and be the Scott Morrison, Scotty from marketing, trying to get everyone to trust in the major parties again. But I still do think he's going to be used by the globalists. You're right.
And my other concern is that with polling showing that Albo is 11 points ahead for preferred prime minister, that doesn't count for nothing.
No, because they said Trump was going to win in 2020, so much so that me and all my mates put a vast amount of money on Trump and lost it, even though he probably did win that election, because there's no way 80 million people who seem to have disappeared voted for Biden. Right. So this was the same thing. Whenever someone's ahead and they say they're going to win, they're not the winner. That's unfortunately how that works.
Yeah, and so we'll see how this thing pans out. Obviously, it's look, either way, I'm not happy with either of it. I hope that the third party movement is going to consolidate. There's plenty of argy bargy within it. There's some horror stories coming through as well. I noticed that it seems that the heat has come out of the trumpet of patriots in terms of the motivation. So it's going along as sort of predicted. Pauline Hanson has introduced her daughter Lee Hanson to run in Tasmania for the Senate, so they're doubling down, and it just shows you that in that party, their star candidate is the boss's daughter. Shows you that One Nation doing their best, and I noticed that Stuart Bonds is running the upper hunt. He did very well 2 elections ago, got something like 18 or 19%. Whether that'll be enough to force some change there, we'll see. But in my area, in the Hunter Valley, it is entirely dominated by Labor. They're very, very nervous. But I'm going to tell you another story as we get towards the end of the show. And I'm going to throw this fellow right into this is a true story. This happened yesterday. So in my seat of Patterson, Meryl Swanson's been the member for 9 years, 3 terms. I was up against her in 2022, and I was openly and publicly attacked by one of her head staffers on multiple occasions who was trying to bait me at pre-poll. She would say horrific things out loud, and I had to get my campaign manager, who knew her, to go and have words to Meryl directly to get her to be removed.
Classy
Yeah,
lady.
exactly. A real nasty piece of work. Anyway, yesterday, my wife goes into Coles to pick up a couple of items, which we don't like using them, but there were certain things that we had to get, and that was the closest place. Anyway, sure enough, they give you the 25% paper bag that always breaks, and certainly she walks outside and the bag breaks.
Oh
And it
my
just so
God.
happens that the bag breaks right in front of Liberal campaigning candidate for the seat of Patterson, Lawrence Antcliffe, who's a young, late 30-something fellow. He's involved with something to do with organising within the Liberal movement and in the construction business. So basically he's a right-wing unionist, which is kind of weird. Now, I haven't had a chance to meet him personally and privately, although I've walked past him a couple of times and he stares at me because he must know my face, but he hasn't got the balls to come up and introduce himself or whatever, and I couldn't be
He's
bothered
probably a
talking to him.
listener, Jason.
It could be. G'day, Lawrence. Anyway, Lawrence, how's this? So my wife's shopping bag breaks on the ground, and there's nothing more embarrassing or inconvenient, but it's more the inconvenience that you've got all this stuff you just paid for. Now, she said, she looks up and she says to him, who looks down, would it be okay if I have one of your bags? They hand out those calico bags as their little
Yes.
gift, whatever.
Mm.
So he throws her a bag. He doesn't come over to give her a hand. He looks at her. Meanwhile, this other chap comes up, covered in tattoos from head to toe, and he's like, "Can I help you out, love?" And
See,
then
always the way,
now,
always the
so
way.
here's my point. Average Joe in the street, no problem, sees a woman in distress and helps her out. But the flippin' candidate who fancies himself with a campaign that's got to be worth $500,000, and the reason I know it's that much they're spending on it, is that last time Brooke Vittnell was the Liberal candidate, and she told me that they were spending about half that amount on her campaign. And the difference was that she had a ton of billboards around the electorate, which are expensive to advertise on. Antcliffe has got one every 500 metres up and down the highway. They are
Well,
spending
he missed an opportunity there. That's in England, that's called pressing the flesh, right? When you go out and
Yep,
kiss the heads of babies,
yep.
although people are less likely to do that after Biden. But he had an opportunity there to press the flesh, right? Because other people were around. They could have seen it. They might have photographed it. Or the lady he helped husband might have spoken about it on radio. So this just goes to show that there's no sort of genuine concern for other people from these guys. And if he is ever seen helping someone, it will only be because he knows a TV camera's there. I think yesterday when Dutton was out and about campaigning. They're not meant to be campaigning, but they are, aren't they? He handed some woman at an office building a birthday cake because he'd been told it's her birthday and, we'll get Dutton to hand over the cake. But obviously only because the cameras are there. Dutton doesn't go around, neither does Albo, giving birthday cakes to random people. So that guy missed an opportunity, and you missed an opportunity with the wife of a radio host. Uh-oh.
It's a poor effort. And what's interesting in this seat, and the reason that I chose not to run this time, apart from the fact that it's bloody expensive to do it, and it takes a lot of time and effort, etc. And there's only so much you can tolerate in terms of sabotage against you by people in this blood sport, is that the Mayor for Maitland, Philip Penfold, who I can't say I'm a particular fan. The reason I'm not a fan of Philip is the fact that during the 2022 campaign, he actively avoided me. He literally crossed the road to stay away from me. And I couldn't understand why he would do that. What was I going to do? Talk to him? Ask him a favour or something?
Maker, Jason, you are
clearly. But anyway, at the recent council elections, he was there handing out, and I went in to vote. And it turns out that his number two is a fellow called Ken Jordan, who is the deputy principal up at the Hunter Trade College. And Ken is a fantastic bloke. He's as hardworking as you can get, and he's done a lot of work in that particular school where my son attends. And he's always, you can reach him at any time. You can communicate by phone, email, go and see him. He's always got time for you. Just one of these great blokes. And Ken was asked, who's a former councillor up at Port Stephens, to run with Philip in Maitland, and he ran. And he ran on his own terms because they're all independents. He said, I won't be following anyone's rules. I'll be running on Ken Jordan's rules. And he got himself elected to council. So I walked up to Philip at that particular pre-poll event, and I walked up. I said, "Hi, Philip." Tapped him on the shoulder. I said, "You got a great man there in Ken Jordan," and I walked off. And that's all I had to say. And he knew it, and he nodded. And I just thought, just because of that acumen alone, and the fact that Philip in Maitland is anti-smart city, are good enough reasons that I don't need to get involved and run fourth or fifth against these bigwigs with hundreds of thousands of dollars to spend. Now, I don't think Penfold is going to be spending anywhere near that amount of money. I know he's recycling his corflutes from council because they just say independent. I'd say Philip is probably going to spend 30 to 50 grand on his campaign. Antcliffe will be spending $500,000 with the Liberals, and Labor they're probably in a bit of trouble. They know Meryl's in strife. She's underdelivered. She sits at the very end of the in Parliament, right at the end. So she's a total outcast. So if anyone's going to go down in the Hunter Valley, expect Patterson Labor to be defeated. And we're looking at the Hunter, where Sue Ellen Wrightson is the leader of the Trumpet of Patriots. She's running in the Hunter in the lower house. It'll be interesting to see if she can compete with Stuart Bonds, who got 18 or 19% back in 2019, and he's having a go. They've changed the national candidate up there from the young male last time to a female this time. So there's a real shake-up. And then there are other very weak candidates. Pat Conroy down in Shortland would have to be the weakest minister I've ever known. I knew Pat Conroy back in my Labor Party days, and I had to stand up for that guy in a Quakers Hill branch meeting when a couple of old blokes gave him a hard time. Pat used to come along, and I never understood why he was coming to Quakers Hill, but he was a unionist at the time, and he was sent there by the union to pick up brownie points because he was going to run for pre-selection. And I lost touch after I left the Labor Party. But when I moved up to the Hunter Valley, I was just wandering around one day and I saw signs and it said Pat Conroy, member for Shortland, and I nearly spat out my drink. I thought, are you kidding me? This is the weakest bloke I've ever met in my life, a gutless wonder, and he's the member for Shortland, and now he's a flippin' minister. And this is what we're dealing with. So this is Labor. They are as weak as piss. The Liberal Party.
Oh my God! Gutless wonder, piece of piss, and he's a minister.
This is the daily Australian radio show, and I am being as honest as I possibly can, because if you want someone to lead in this country, you're not going to get it from the mainstream, is what I'm saying. So I want people to identify that this bloke on the other side of the microphone knows these people personally, has worked with them, can call them out for their nonsense and bullshit, and has actual real evidence and anecdotal evidence. And I will debate any one of these clowns in any position on any day without notes on anything. That's how confident I am that these guys don't know what they're talking about, and it's a facade. So when I see them out there campaigning and pretending to press the flesh, I know that they're full of it. And in the words of Jackie Mason, the late great New York Jewish comedian, they're all full of shit. If you want them to perform, put them on commission.
Well, if they were real politicians and if they really cared, they'd come on and have a scrap on radio and a chat about what they're doing anyway. That's just, how politics goes. We're at the end of the show, Jason. What would you like to say before we go? What would you advise people as we run into this election cycle?
Well, I think I said everything I need to do. I just want people to know that you have someone in your corner that knows how this game is played and knows how it works and can call them out. And there are many, many people, but there is nothing quite like the ability to take the gloves off and get in the ring and have a go. In other words, get involved whichever way you do it, and back yourselves. Anyone listening to this show is already in the top 5% of the country in terms of intelligence. You will easily hold your own against any of these people. The only thing you need to do, unlike what I'm doing now, is just keep your cool. Less is more,
Yeah.
but back yourself. Just back
My
yourself.
my dream, Jason, is to hold a town hall with Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton and others, and have a huge live audience, everything filmed live, nothing edited, and me to be on the run with a microphone with myself and the audience asking free questions, not pre-arranged questions, not pre-approved press, which is the only people Albo will take questions from, and without any notes, any script, anything, without being prepared, pretty much how I come on this radio show, be able to ask questions of these guys or comment on what they're saying and what they're peddling. Because at the end of the day, they're salesmen and they're peddling stuff to you that there is no law, no act, no legislation that will hold them to those promises. And so we're judging them on their character. And I don't believe that they have the strength of character to be a great leader. Thank you for listening to the Daily Australian, to myself, Nicola Charles, and my co-host and co-producer, Jason Olbourne. Have a fantastic weekend. Go and enjoy yourselves. Live it up. Screw the lot of them. They don't want you to have a nice life, so make sure you do. And we will see you again on Monday.